Alright guys, welcome into Formula 1 news. The announcement has just been made official. Sergio Perez will remain in his seat at Red Bull for the next 2 years. Not just a one-year extension as was widely predicted, but a 2-year deal that will take Perez until at least 2026 it seems. This comes amid a major downturn in form for Sergio Perez over the last couple of races. What does this mean for Red Bull, given the Constructors Championship is very much still up for grabs this season and certainly in the future? Why are Red Bull making this decision with arguably better options out there on the horizon? What does it mean for Max Verstappen and for the likes of Carlos Sainz, who was really hoping for this seat? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, plenty of news in the F1 world today, certainly even around Hyundai. Rumours emerging that they are looking to be keen potentially on an entry into Formula 1. Now, it's worth noting that Cyril, who of course was top Renault guy a few years ago, is now working for Hyundai. And that's been the case for roughly the last year or so. And there has been lots of talk about, well, more Asian races, shall we say, over the coming couple of seasons. There's interest all around the world for certain races. It basically depends who's going to pay the most money. But there is a feeling that Hyundai could be very much interested in coming into the sport. Now, where would they go? Because there's talk about, oh, F1's like anti-American by rejecting Andretti. Like, you know, they're not anti-American, they're just anti-losing money, right? Like, they want to make as much money as possible, and they feel like expanding the grid will reduce increase the number of slices of the pie they have to give out, and all these other complications. Liberty Media, of course, is an American company. I don't think they're rejecting Andretti for that reason, so I think Hyundai would be rejected probably just the same. So therefore, I guess the theory might go, how about you buy a team? That's potentially an option. Alpine may be for sale. We've, of course, always talked about Haas as a potential target for acquisition, just because, you know, the way their operation is set up is weaker than many. So I guess time will only tell whether this goes anywhere. Obviously, we've got to talk about the driver market as well. Yuki Tsunoda, the BBC, are today reporting that Williams, Alpine and Haas, saying that at least those teams are interested. Of course, there's also Sauber as a possibility, but maybe somewhat unlikely. Alpine, of course, need a driver. Haas would be quite an interesting situation given the Ferrari connection. Williams is a possibility. I think for Yuki in the medium term, he'll still be thinking about the Aston Martin Honda situation. We'll discuss more on that in just a second. And of course, RB, they would like to keep Yuki, but they may not be allowed to do so. He may leave, although there is something more to be said on that in a second. Now, speaking of Aston Martin, they've gone backwards, right? Mercedes haven't got massively closer to the front of the field over the last 12 months or so, but what they have done is separated themselves from Aston Martin. There's questions as to why. Is it the wind tunnel of Aston Martins that Mercedes obviously also use? It's Merck's wind tunnel that Aston Martin also use, that they don't get the correct simulation correlation compared to the reality on the track, because both teams seem to be struggling with that. But then again, Aston Martin, using those Mercedes facilities, had the success they did at the start of 2023. But Lawrence Stroll, of course, not happy about this, because, you know, he wants his son to be the world champion. He certainly wants more podiums. You can't go from having the massive progress at the start of 23 to now all of a sudden being back at the midfield, struggling to get even out of Q1 at times. He held a meeting with Mike Crack and Dan Fallows, Mike Crack team principal, Dan Fallows top engineer, of course, came over from Red Bull after the disappointing Imola upgrades, and there is talk that Dan Fallows' position is basically on the chopping block here. There was even talk that potentially he might replace Mike Crack as their team principal. We shall see. But Lawrence Stroll has been speaking to and has apparently made a direct offer to Enrico Cardile, who is the technical director at Ferrari. Now, it seems unlikely Cardile would leave Ferrari and Maranello right now, but of course Lawrence Stroll has also been trying to get Adrian Newey. That doesn't seem to have gone anywhere, and who knows, maybe Cardile thinks, well, Newey's going to come in, Lawrence is offering me all this cash and this stock or whatever, maybe I'll go over and work for him instead, because, you know, if Stroll can't get Newey to work for Aston Martin, then maybe getting Cardile, technical director of Ferrari, is not a bad idea either. So he may try, he may fail, but Dan Fallows is most certainly under pressure right now at Aston Martin, and Stroll is looking to spend money to correct the tides that, of course, Aston Martin have been taking as of late. Montreal is this upcoming weekend, and there's been lots of talk about Red Bull from top to bottom. So we're getting into the Perez stuff in a second. Before we get there, how are Red Bull going to do this weekend? This is going to be very telling, I think. This race, and then certainly Spain, will really tell us, is this still going to be a comfortable championship for Max Verstappen and Red Bull? Were the last few races just a kind of blip on what's going to still be a dominant season with the best car? Or is there more to it than that? They've resurfaced the track at Montreal. Pirelli say that it's not going to change the grip levels. It may have reduced the bumps on the track, which I'm sure Max Verstappen will be happy about. But actually, Max made it quite clear that the expectations for Red Bull at this track are not especially high. And I still have a hard time believing Red Bull when they say they're not going to do well, just because, we've lived through this for the last couple of years of the Red Bull domination. But then again, Verstappen and actually Helmut Marko said this going into Monaco, that they were concerned that Monaco was going to be tough. And now Max is saying, yeah, it's not going to be a strong circuit for the Red Bull. There's even been talk from AMUS that these circuits in particular will potentially be weaker for Red Bull than in previous years. Not even just compared to their previous iteration of car, because this car seems to have a fundamental issue when it comes to riding the curbs and the bumps and these other things that we've discussed over the last week or two, but especially because the competitors are now closer to Red Bull, right? So they say Imola, Monaco, Montreal, which is this coming weekend, Baku, Singapore and Interlagos might be worse than last year. Singapore, of course, was terrible last year for Red Bull. So if Singapore's worse this year, then, maybe Max Verstappen is never going to get that victory at Singapore that he is still searching for. But Montreal is again listed as a potential weak track given the characteristics of the circuit. Then again, though, in some ways, it's a pretty traditional track. You've got some hairpins, you've got some faster corners, but it does have a lot of curbs to ride, and it can be kind of bumpy because it's a bit of a street circuit, really, although that may have changed this year with the changes to the asphalt of the track. But let's talk about exactly how this turned out at Red Bull, right? Because Alpine have been an absolute mess lately. Ocon's now gone, Piastri's long gone, Fernando Alonso, of course, is long gone as well. They're looking for options. Mick Schumacher has been at least thrown around as a consideration. Jack Doohan, Mick Schumacher, Yuki Tsunoda as potential targets. We'll see where Alpine decide to go. Günther Steiner says, don't get Mick. Well, we know that maybe Mick and Steiner didn't get on so well when they were part of Haas, but Red Bull, they have been talking about and teasing this potential announcement. We've seen now for quite some time, really, what the plan was going to be with Red Bull. We've heard for probably 2 weeks now that Perez was going to get this contract extension. The question was, what sort of deal was he going to get? How long was it going to last for? Red Bull yesterday actually said here, well, they were joking around here on threads about the whole Ocon announcement because they put out stay tuned. Ocon got announced to be gone from Alpine, and therefore the discussion was, oh, Ocon to Red Bull, here we go. It's like no one with a brain actually believed that was going to be happening. But today they then said, all right, set your alarms, 5 p.m. British summertime, although it's not been especially summery here today in Manchester. Big announcement coming through, right? And this came at the same time of rumours emerging that Daniel Ricciardo is due to be retained at RB for 2025, and even Yuki Tsunoda is potentially not going to be going anywhere because they will not allow him to walk away unless somebody potentially buys out the contract. So Ricciardo's expected to stay. There's even been discussion around Horner protecting Daniel Ricciardo from being replaced by Liam Lawson. This also says a lot, I would say, on the Red Bull power struggle and the lack of power that Helmut Marko seems to now have. And we'll get into that in a second because I think it is very important in terms of the way Red Bull looks in, let's say, 1 to 2 years' time. Horner, clearly, he calls the shots now. And that is true with evidence such as this, because Sergio Perez has secured a contract extension. And Red Bull themselves described this as a 2-year extension. We heard rumours that Perez wanted a 2-year deal, Red Bull were looking for a 1-year deal, and some sort of compromise was going to be there. There has been theories this is a 1+1, although other journalists disagree and they say no, it is straight up a 2-year extension. Now, I will say many teams, James Vowles included, as of others, even Fred Vasseur, have said going into 2026, so much changes with the car, with the engine, all of that stuff. You really don't want to have to deal with driver changes as well. So many teams would much prefer get the lineup locked in now for 25 and 26, and then you don't have to worry about any of that drama. You can just focus on building the best car possible, and you get the most consistency 25 to 26. So I would not be surprised if this is a 2-year deal. Am I surprised Red Bull have done this? Red Bull have been known for the last several years, even last season, dropping Nick de Vries, Danny Rick comes in, Liam Lawson comes in, Ricciardo's back in, all this stuff. They're a ruthless team, and maybe that is Helmut Marko's doing. But it feels to me that the ruthlessness of that Red Bull outfit has somewhat diminished because Perez gets the contract extension. They're not dropping anyone mid-season from RB, AlphaTauri as it was previously, and Toro Rosso before that, like they typically have done. And they're not even going to take a gamble on trying to upgrade Perez. They're just going to lock him down for another couple of years. So there's a few ways to read into this, because Perez to me is clearly not the most talented driver out there they could have signed. But does he make sense from a not challenging Max Verstappen POV? Sure. Is he going to be able to deliver good enough results compared to McLaren, Ferrari, and potentially even Mercedes? I don't personally think so. I think the last couple of rounds show that. Then again, of Red Bull's merchandise sales, does 65% of that go to Mexico, which is entirely Sergio Perez is doing? Yes. So if you're Christian Horner, who now seems to entirely call the shots, you are looking at this, I imagine, from a business POV, not necessarily a racing POV maybe. It's tough to say. The thing is, Perez may lose them the Constructors Championship by not being as good as some alternatives, let's say a Carlos Sainz, for example, but he may still make them more money than they lose by being first in the Constructors, by selling all this merchandise in South America and Mexico, and that may be a legitimate business case, in addition to the fact that, well, maybe Max just wins the championship anyway. Perez isn't there to take points off Max, as Hamilton made to Leclerc, or Leclerc made to Hamilton next year, for example, at Ferrari. To be fair, though, I think it was Fred Vasseur made the point that actually he doesn't really buy the idea that Hamilton and Leclerc will take points off each other, because by working together, and let's say they're P2, P3 behind Max Verstappen, they can work strategically together to actually gain more points between the two than they potentially would have had otherwise. Of course, that depends if the Hamilton-Leclerc, teammate rivalry gets particularly fierce, but that will depend, I suppose, on how competitive that car is. So there's been some debate from journalists on what this actually is. Is it a 1+1 deal where the team gets the choice? They'll give Perez a year, and then they get to choose whether they give him another year. But I will say, I think it is relatively likely now that they might just go through the entire 2 years, even if this is true. Although some journalists, like Daniel Moxon here from the Mirror, says he understands no, it's not a 1+1 as reported elsewhere. This is a straight up 2-year extension. And even if it is a 1+1, as I say, Christian Horner seems pretty happy with the current setup at Red Bull, and therefore extending him into 2026 and making sure there is stability into that new cycle as possible. Now that would change if Max were to leave, and well, we'll discuss that possibility a little bit more so in a second. Now you think, okay, why would Max leave? He's got Perez as a teammate, can beat up on him for the next couple of years, and that's a fair point. And that may be one of the reasons why Horner has decided to re-sign Perez, is because it keeps Max nice and comfortable, not feeling threatened in the seat, and potentially not so willing to leave, despite all the drama happening over the last few months at Red Bull. There's also been this talk as well, for obviously Perez responds, delighted to be staying here to continue our journey together, and this team has great history for 2 more years. I will say, effectively every single year Perez, with the exception of the start of this season, but every year that he's been at Red Bull, 2021, 22, 23, and now potentially into 2024, he's just got worse with respect to his teammate, really. 2021, he did a respectable job, still wasn't third in the drivers, but he did a good job, obviously. Abu Dhabi, the defense, Minister of Defense, all this stuff. Like when he raced Wheel Tour with Hamilton, he was but got a good show. 2022, he was okay, but not great, and then 2023 was just an absolute disaster from mid-season onwards. This year has started better, but obviously it's gone rather downhill, and this is the current Constructors and Drivers' Championship standings. Perez, despite a very good start to the season, is now in 5th with 107 points, behind Carlos Sainz, who missed a race, let's not forget. Lando's 3rd, Leclerc is 2nd, and Max is way ahead of him. And that means in the Constructors, this is where we are. Red Bull are only 24 points ahead of Ferrari, despite having, the best car on average, obviously, and Max Verstappen at the wheel. But Perez is not performing over the last couple of rounds, and it's going to be interesting to see, does this new deal for Perez get him stable, get him solidified, get him confidence going forward? He can focus fully on the track rather than on all the other distractions. Or is it going to be, I've got the deal, great, doesn't really matter what I do, I'm chilling for the next couple of years, Horner trusts me for some reason, whatever. And this raises serious questions, right, if this continues, because I don't think Perez is just going to magically get any better. Certainly with McLaren getting closer, with Ferrari getting closer, maybe even with Mercedes getting closer. There's more pressure on Perez. Max is still going to be up there whenever the car is available. But whenever the car is tricky to drive, Max is obviously able to capitalize on what it's capable of. He's going to make more mistakes, Max, when the car is tricky, but, he's going to basically get the best out of it. Perez can't do that, and he seems to be even worse off the pace when the car is challenging than when it's nice and comfortable to drive, as maybe it was at the start of the season on some of those circuits. So I just don't see how this ends well for Red Bull from a competitiveness perspective, right? They could have got Sainz. It was an option. They could have signed Sainz. Maybe that wouldn't have been the best for Verstappen. He might not be so happy about that. Maybe he's happier with Perez alongside him. But also, this year's constructors, certainly next year's constructors, and even 2026, raises big questions as to whether they're going to be as competitive as maybe they need to be. The big debate that I have on this really is what it means for the internal state of Red Bull. This is a picture from back in February here. We've got Adrian Newey before he left the team after all the internal drama, and here's Horner and here's Marko, and this of course is Carlos Sainz Sr. discussing potential options for next year. This was about 3 or so weeks after Hamilton was confirmed to be joining Ferrari for the next season. They've rejected Sainz's interest. He's going to have to probably go now to Audi or Williams, neither of which, of course, are especially attractive options. But Horner seems to now have the full reign of this ship, because if Helmut Marko still had any power, I don't think Perez gets this extension in the same way that he has. I don't think Ricciardo would still be there, or at least it would be something, there would be some competitiveness for whether Ricciardo would stay or not. Feels to me that Marko has been pushed very much to the sidelines here of the decision making, because, it just feels like a different Red Bull team than it was even 6-12 months ago, right? And maybe there are reasons for that. Of course, the implication would be, what if Marko decides to leave? Does he just retire? Does he call it a day? Even do Mercedes get him? Because Toto Wolff said, yeah, Marko, if you want to come work for us, we'd be happy. You can be our Niki Lauda replacement, which is, people debated whether that was a fair comment or not, but, whatever. That's how Wolff is trying to run the ship, because that way he can try and lure Max Verstappen to his team. And that is, of course, the next discussion here is what happens with Max in the longer term, because maybe this is a move by Horner to say, okay, look, Max, we're going to give you the guy you want. You can, smash Perez every single race, every single qualifying session, and just try and win the championship for us. That'd be fantastic. But if the car is regressing, of course, Newey has now left the team. Others are rumoured to be out the door in the near future as well. There's talks of their engine project might be not so good for 2026 and beyond. Even George Russell says he could see a world where Max simply just steps away, takes a sabbatical, maybe spends the year racing WEC or IndyCar. I don't think he'd do that, but you know what I mean, like doing the Le Mans or something, and then come back the year after, seeing which team's the dominant team, because Max would effectively walk into any team that he wanted to, within reason. Maybe not Ferrari, given the strength of their lineup, but effectively everywhere else would take Max in 2027, for example. But we believe that if Helmut Marko leaves Red Bull or is fired or whatever, then it opens the door for Max to simply walk away as well from his longer term deal. So I think this whole situation says something to me about the future here, because I don't know if Perez would be re-signed as emphatically as this if Horner wasn't concerned about losing Max. And if he's concerned about losing Max on some level, then it's obviously possible that he might depart, right? Especially given this whole Marko dynamic. So we'll see how that one goes. Still feels unlikely, but this could be a real mistake for Red Bull in the medium term. If they re-sign Perez and then Max just leaves with Marko in the next year or so, then all of a sudden Red Bull are kind of like stuck with Perez, right? There were rumours that if Max was to leave very recently, they would have looked at Piastri and looked at, I think it was Albon. Those were the two drivers they were rumoured to be looking for. And that is a pretty sensible lineup, probably, if you no longer have Max Verstappen. And Sergio Perez probably doesn't make so much sense if you no longer have Max Verstappen. So what do you guys think about it in the comment section below? Few nuanced, interesting angles to kind of discuss this Red Bull topic. Hopefully I covered everything with reasonable efficacy. Obviously, Sainz has got to go somewhere now. He can't go to Red Bull anymore. Mercedes seems to be off the cards because it's almost certain, it seems at this point, they are going to sign up Kimi Antonelli for next year. And then Sainz has got to choose Audi or Williams. Those are basically the two options. If I'm Sainz, where do I go? God, tricky. Do I say Williams? I think I do, to be honest. But I think I agree with the voters that Audi is probably the more likely of the decisions that he might make. But I don't know, maybe if I'm Sainz to choose Williams, not really sure. I voted, whatever. We're going to leave it there for the time being. Just one final thing to mention here. This weekend, we of course are going to the Canadian Grand Prix again, and it may rain. This is the weather forecast right now. This is the weather forecast for, I think, well, this is the Sunday, for example, during race time. And okay, it's 50-40%, but looks like heavy rain is certainly on the cards basically every single day. So yeah, we'll see what sort of running we actually get this weekend. Standard Montreal-esque activities right here, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.